gentlemen, for most of the hour, we are joined by Lord Christopher Monckton, who is, out of all the great people out there fighting the globalist collectivist, using the environmental movement to take control of the industrial world and destroy it so they can consolidate power, he is the tip of the spear. It was 3 years ago with the Copenhagen event that he was able to get the secret document that they plan to double the taxes on the third world, or right at double what they'd be on the West. And then it was a total collectivist takeover to give 100 trillion, basically, as the London Guardian reported. Also, the London Telegraph reported 100 trillion in global taxes over the next decade. Now, Congress then shot down Obama's carbon taxes. He's still going ahead by executive fiat, but that makes them lose the moral high ground. And here's at climatedepot.com a report on this. Thatcher advisor Lord Monckton evicted from UN climate summit after challenging global warming, escorted from the hall, and security officers stripped him of his UN credentials. Monckton to the UN. In the 16 years we have been coming to these conferences, there has been no global warming. Calls to deport Monckton from UN conference in Qatar. And he always, the reason they hate him is there's good people in all major governments, and they know that massive carbon taxes on African, Latin American, Asian, European, Russian, Chinese governments are designed to be selectively enforced and just shut down society. It's a eugenics-based weapon system. And Monckton's an expert on that and can break it down on his website, scienceandpublicpolicy.org. And so he always gets the documents. And I know he's gotten some information now that he's going to be able to reveal to us as well. But first, he's been assaulted on video from behind for no reason by a police officer. He's been thrown out in Durban, South Africa. He had to parachute in. And people on radio think I'm joking about that. Guys, you go find just Lord Monckton parachutes into climate summit. But I'll play some of that if you're watching us at InfowarsNews.com. But the point is also New American, William F. Jasper's reporting on it. UN summit, transforming your kids into, quote, climate change agents, as Al Gore has called for previously. So they're there calling for all this right now, also calling to restrict your internet. The UN is an incredibly authoritarian organization. Even the New York Times admits they send in UN troops to kill people in Africa and Latin America to get them off their land, to give it to major corporations. It's just but movie stars say it's loving. If Angelina Jolie says the UN's good, why, it must be. She cares about us. She's not a snake-eyed demon or anything. Lord Monckton, again, businessman, newspaper editor, investor, classical architect, inventor, trained orator, and high priest of climate skepticism. Lord Monckton, again, was a special advisor to Margaret Thatcher as UK Prime Minister from 82 to 86. On leaving Downing Street, he established a successful specialist consultancy company giving technical advice to corporations and governments. We're showing him skydiving into the conference a few months ago. Lord Monckton is a knowledge of science and politics behind global warming is noted for its breadth and depth, and he has traveled and lectured in continents worldwide, and he joins us now. Lord Monckton via Skype. Joining us. Thank you, sir, for coming on. You've got the floor until we go to break. Please give us a report on what the criminal authoritarians are up to right now.
Well, first of all, Alex, I have to put my own hand up here because what I did was a little naughty. I was sitting in a very comfortable seat where normally the delegation from Burma would sit. And I just happened to have got to the meeting half an hour early because I wanted to go through some of the documents that were coming out from the UN at that stage of the conference. And then gradually the room filled up around me and the delegation from Burma didn't appear. And so at the very last moment, really just very much on the spur of the moment, I decided to signify to the chair that I would quite like to say something, and was acknowledged. So I said three things. I said, one, very respectfully, very politely, I said, one, there's been no global warming for 16 years. Two, even if there had been, it would be a great deal cheaper to do nothing about it now, spend nothing now, and adapt in a focused way later if and when any consequences of warming that might be adverse actually appeared. And three, that perhaps we now need an independent scientific review of what these conferences were doing to make sure we were still headed in the right direction. And that was all I said. And it took me no longer than that to say it. It was 45 seconds in the official record. And then I got up to go and was immediately approached by a UN policeman. There are hundreds of them always at these conferences, toting truncheons and mobile phones and other bits of kit. And he said, you stay there. And then eventually another policeman came and they said, come with us. And we went outside into the balmy night. And there, an enormous gathering of various UN officials appeared, murmuring into their telephones, and eventually a very tall character in a suit, who I think was the UN head of security, said that I would be escorted off the premises, and out I went into the night. So it's a storm in a teacup, frankly, and I did, I've got to admit, Alex, behave just a little bit improperly. But on the other hand, the three things I said in that 45 seconds when I had the floor would not have been heard by any of the delegates otherwise. And all three of them are sensible points. There hasn't been any global warming for 16 years on any measure. And the attempts to deny this on the part of the conference and several previous conferences really are becoming painfully embarrassing. Likewise, it is now becoming apparent that it really is many times more expensive to try to stop global warming than simply to let it happen and adapt to it, as the human race is very good at doing. And certainly now there is a case, given this long period without warming, and that we now begin to know more about the huge cost of trying to get relatively small changes in the amount of CO2 that's emitted to the atmosphere, it is time that there was a proper independent scientific review, not done by the UN's climate panel, but by a completely different group.
All right, let me just interject here, Lord Monckton, a question, because this is important, obviously. Look, we know it's all a fraud. In the 60s and 70s, they said it was going to be global cooling by 2000 if we didn't give them all our money. They're always, scripting it where they're the planet savior and you kill yourself, basically, or be their slave and worship them for it, and then they'll take good care of you. They know it's all a fraud. What is the new evil coming out of this conference? Because Obama says he's going to try to ram through carbon taxes without Congress. I know that's happening.
I don't think get very far with that, frankly, because unless Congress votes for carbon taxes, that is something that the EPA really can't get away with on its own. If it tried, it really would risk what I think it's beginning to risk anyway, which is outright abolition the next time Republicans take the presidency. It has become a monster now, and the best thing for the environment, apart from anything else, would be, and certainly for freedom, would be to sweep it away altogether, abolish it, and reallocate the enormous savings.
So what are they up to there? You're there. You always have breaking intel at these. What's the new?
First thing is they have agreed to carry on with the Kyoto Protocol, which actually expires on December the 31st. And they're going to enter into what is called a second commitment period, where various nations make promises about how much they will cut CO2 emissions, promises that they will not, in fact, keep. On the longer term, cooperative action, as is the code word for gradual introduction of, if you like, worldwide slavery and overtaxation to line the UN's pockets, there is less agreement, and they're still wrestling with that. But the Kyoto Protocol, they've managed to kind of revive the corpse a little bit. It's a bit of a zombie, but they have done that. So there is still going to be more spending on this. But what is notable is that the tone of desperation is now growing. I mean, they do now know, if only because I told them, that there's been no global warming for 16 years. And some of them, the brighter ones, will go back and check that with their scientists. And their scientists, like ours, will try to lie about it. But in the end, the truth is there hasn't been any global warming for 16 years. And that's a long time, given the enormous extra amounts of CO2 that are going into the atmosphere. The other breaking news is that China is now growing its CO2 emissions so fast that at the current rates of growth, you could close the West down altogether. And the pre-existing rates of annual increase in the CO2 content of the atmosphere would simply continue. The West is now actually irrelevant to all this, even if there were a scientific problem, because of China, India, Indonesia, Russia, South Africa, Brazil, and other developing countries, all of whom are rapidly increasing their consumption of fossil fuels in order to make their people prosperous by giving them fossil fuel electricity, the cheapest way to make them prosperous, and therefore the cheapest way to make sure that eventually those populations stabilize. And that actually is a great benefit to the environment, provided we let these poorer countries grow. And so far there is nothing, no suggestion in these conferences that the developing countries should be stopped from growing. But you've only got to start doing the numbers to realize that China, several years ago now, overtook the United States as the world's biggest emitter. It now is coming very close to emitting about a third of all the CO2 in the world. And this is growing and growing all the time. India is beginning to grow, of course, Indonesia as well, Brazil likewise. These are huge countries with enormous populations. And between them, they account for getting on to half the world's population. And if they are not in any way bound to reduce their emissions, and effectively they're not under anything that's gone on here, it really doesn't matter what we do. So insanity is piled upon insanity, piled upon insanity. First of all, we don't have a problem. Secondly, therefore, we don't have any warming for 16 years. These conferences have only been going on for 18 years.
But now they're shifting over to endangered species. Let's come back and get into the brainwashing of the children that they're calling for at the conference. Recently, the Harvard School of Health looked at more than a dozen scientific studies concerning fluoride and confirmed what countless other scientists have been documenting for decades. Sodium fluoride in the body reduces IQ and increases cancers. You see, the aluminum industry and the fertilizer industries would have to pay to store all the toxic waste they produce. But instead, they get our counties and cities to pay to put the poison in our water. It's not just fluoride we're getting, but lead, mercury, arsenic, the list goes on. And a lot of this toxic waste comes from China. Unfortunately, fluoride and its derivatives are only one of hundreds of toxins being added to our drinking water. We're battling the globalist on so many fronts. Health is an area where we can all take control of our lives, and it all starts with that basic building block of water. It is time to purify our family's water. The ProPure filtration system with added fluoride filters is the best system from my research to protect you and your family. Infowarsstore.com already has the lowest prices on ProPure water filtration. But until December 10th, we are going to offer 15% off the already lowest price. I know what I'm giving my family this Christmas. ProPure. Go to Infowarsstore.com and get 15% off the already lowest price out there with the code WATER15. WATER15, and you get 15% off at Infowarsstore.com. Lord Monckton joins us here on the broadcast, talk about what the UN's doing. Folks, you have to understand that, yes, politically, they even admit it now, since the climategate stuff came out, since the plan to shut down the third world came out, the death sentence, that politically people are turning against them, but they're in charge. They don't care. So how do we deal with this paradox, Lord Monckton? I want to get more into what's happening at that conference. I'm reading there's calls to deport you out of the country now. I want to find out first if there's any truth to that. But how do we deal with these authoritarians? Because you rightfully say the tide has turned against them decidedly, but they don't care. So how do you deal with that paradox?
What you do is you do what I did. You go to them and you tell them the truth. And if, okay, I spoke out of turn at a meeting where observers weren't supposed to speak, well, tough luck. There was no other way that anyone there would listen to what I said, and they did listen. Because once I'd got my third point out, I spoke for 45 seconds. That's what all this is about. And at the end of that 45 seconds, they were screaming and howling with rage. And the UN, interestingly, in editing the tape before allowing it to go out, has cut out all the howling and screaming and hooting. It doesn't want anyone to realize that this is essentially a bear garden where everybody has been schooled to only believe the same thing. And if somebody like me does get in and tell them a few home truths, they really, really don't like it. So the simple thing, Alex, is to do what you do and do what I do, to get out there and just go on telling the truth until everybody realizes it is the truth. And their difficulty now is that our predictions, yours and mine, that global warming really wasn't going to be all it was cracked up to be, are coming true. 16 years without global warming. That was the message that I put all around the conference over and over again. And finally, in this plenary session, where they were all there, I told them exactly what the situation was. No global warming for 16 years. That's basically the end of the scare. In any rational organization, there would be no more of this talk of carbon taxes or cap and trade or regulations or UN taking world power or children, as you say, Alex, we must talk about this, being schooled to tell on their parents. You know, my parents turned on the light in their bedroom half an hour before they got up. That was a waste of electricity, and we're going to report them to the climate police. That's the kind of thing that used to go on in communist Russia.
And they've set up websites, and Al Gore has gone to kids. We played it and said, do this. The state is trying to take our children over. While these elitists fly around their private jets and stay in five-star resorts festooned with hookers. I mean, it's just that they are a group of organized crime masquerading as earth savers. It's such a joke. They're like bank robbers showing up saying, hands up, give us the money out of the till. We're saving the earth. I mean, when does the madness end?
They are governments. What is really happening here, Alex, is a very, very interesting phenomenon. And it has been fascinating to watch it at close quarters over the last few years. And that is that these people, the governing elite worldwide, are beginning to form a sort of unity. They're becoming a single organization. And the mission of that organization is to preserve and enhance their own powers, pay, perks, privileges, and pensions at the expense of the rest of us. And we are merely now their slaves. And if you go back to feudal England, at that time, the serfs only had to work 3 months of the year for their masters. But now, if you pay ordinary rates of taxation in America or Britain or most Western countries, you're already having to work more like 5 or 6 months of the year for your master.
Oh, if you count all the taxes, it's like 8 months of the year.
That's right. And we're more slaves now than we ever would have been under the feudal system. This is how far it's gone.
And now they're saying they want more. Did you hear the head of the Democratic Party, Howard Dean, come out and say that the poor need to pay more too?
Well, that's the thing. See, and that's a very interesting admission. After all of them teasing Romney for wanting to spare the rich from taxation, now the real truth comes out, which is that you can allow the rich to pay no tax at all, and it wouldn't make any difference to the country's revenues because there are too few rich people to matter. What matters is the vast majority of the population, your average Joe taxpayer. That's where the state gets nearly all of its money from, and those are the people that have to pay more in order to balance the budget after these predators and raiders, all of whom gather here at these conferences. Wherever there's a grass skirt, they'll be there, in order to find new and exotic ways of telling us how we've got to
and they exempt themselves in most of these countries from the taxes. Stay there, Lord Monckton. Don't mean to cut you off, but the music cuts off your Skype there. We're going to come right back with Lord Monckton to get more into this and have him finish his point that got cut off there. Did you know the EU bureaucrats don't pay taxes? Because they make the rules. Man, these people are incredible. Thousands and thousands of them are paid more than the British Prime Minister.
As Skynet continues to rise, most Americans have no idea the arsenal their own government is prepared to use against them. Walking weapons and unmanned drones that will find their way to U.S. soil if they haven't already. But the future is not written in stone. Join Infowars for the first ever drone mob December 8th at Zilker Park in Austin, Texas. This family-friendly event is to inform the public of the weapons that target us. Bring your own drones and spy planes as we make the statement that we don't want our weapons turned against us. Be there at 11 a.m. There will be some amazing giveaways and even a video contest. So bring your camera, because whoever films the best drone video at the event and posts it up on YouTube will receive 1,000 Federal Reserve notes. And be sure to use the hashtag DroneMob on Twitter and visit Infowars.com for more details.
Why is the website called prisonplanet.tv or prisonplanet.com? Because the globalists, in their own words, say they're constructing a prison planet of, for, and by authoritarians. Our Constitution and Bill of Rights is of, for, and by the people, based on the Magna Carta that Lord Monckton was foreshadowing earlier. You know, people don't know that in England, the Parliament first voted to not have war with the colonies. Then the king had to go in there and convince them they had to do it. But the ideas that we saw spring here in 1776 actually came out of a 500-year fight in England that had been happening for the rights of man. And here we are today. If you have any education, any understanding of authoritarianism, this is what we're facing. Before we go back to Lord Monckton, I want to, and your phone calls, I want to show you some articles here. Now, I talked about this 6 years ago. Paul Watson wrote an article about its linked in it. Verizon follows Google in turning phones and TVs into wiretaps. Infowars first broke story of invasive spying 6 years ago. It's already going on. Here is the Daily Mail. The TV box that can detect when you're cuddling on the sofa and show you an advert for condoms. System uses motion sensors, microphones, and thermal imaging. This is going in all the new cars, all the new video game consoles, Kinect, Microsoft, all of it. Cameras to view viewers, described by Campaign as a privacy nightmare. And, you know, Google won't even let you turn it off. You know, when I first reported on this almost 7 years ago, people didn't believe it. People didn't believe it. Even though we had a link to Google and a press release to shareholders. Now, they admit, but you know, the NSA admits, and the Brits are doing this too, Europe's doing it, they say, well, it's okay that your computer and your cell phone listens to you even when it's off. That's by global regulations. It's installed on all of them. Told you about that in 96 when it first started, the Telecommunications Act. Ladies and gentlemen, the magnitude of this is just off the charts. They say, well, it's an AI computer recording keywords, checking it for advertising and other things, but government says, oh, we don't come look at it unless the computer says you did something wrong, and then that's probable cause. So you pre-listen, and then the computer, because it's a computer, it's okay, they say. It's not personal. And then a person goes and looks at what's all recorded. And the former top NSA officials have been coming out, as you know, in the last 2 weeks saying everything's recorded, everything's listened to. Well, I knew that in the Telecommunications Act. Same thing in Europe. In the mid-90s, they put this in with all the manufacturers and the regulations. It have all this. It's how we knew. Lord Monckton, I want to get back into the UN and where it's going and take calls. We're getting into brainwashing kids, but they are building this panopticon spy system that makes Orwell's nightmare look like Valhalla, you know, a heavenly plane. And here we are. It's all racing ahead. And it's all engineered by the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about. Where does it end? How does it end? I mean, you read the British Ministry of Defense report in 2007, you know, saying what the world would be like in the next 10 years. And it describes a world with the resources cut off, a post-industrial system, re-education centers. Same thing with our Army prospectuses. I mean, the elite, they don't tell the Army the whole story. When you know what the policy planners are doing, you understand why they're telling the Army, get ready for this, as if it's just going to happen on its own. Why are these, because you know these people better than anybody. You've worked in the highest levels of government. You've been around these globalists constantly. What is the sycophantic desire for hellish tyranny? What is it in these people?
It's very, very strange, because in the past in Britain, when we were the first country in the world to install machinery to listen to every telephone call,
Lord Monckton, you got cut off when you were talking about Britain was the first place to put in the total surveillance grid that the NSA system's based off of. Please continue, sir.
They did this before the Second World War. Every telephone call was then listened to individually. That's how we were able to round up every single German agent in the UK, bar one. And the story of that one is a very interesting one that I'll tell you one day. It hasn't come out in the official histories yet. But thereafter, we were the first to develop these computers that could listen to every telephone call, look for keywords, alert operators, listen to this one, listen to that one, so that there could be complete surveillance. And interestingly, in those days, in the 1960s and 70s, it was the left who were saying this was outrageous, it shouldn't happen, this was the world being taken over by the military-industrial complex, exactly as you say, Eisenhower warned about in his farewell speech as president. And yet now it's the left that are arguing for these things and the right that are saying this has all gone too far. There's been an astonishing turnaround in political outlook. But of course the left are always more numerous in government because the left are believers in regulating and controlling and spying on everybody else. They always have been. That's what 1984 by George Orwell was all about. Your television screen watching you. Big Brother is watching you. He was the first to see that this is exactly what would come. And here we are already with every computer, such as mine, with a little camera eye looking out at you. What I do, Alex, and this confuse them, is you just stick a little piece of tape over that when you're not actually using the camera, and they can't see through that. So there are...
Oh, that's what I do. Listen, 15 years ago, I'd have family at the house and have the webcam covered or the camera on the screen covered, and they'd say, well, you're crazy. Why are you doing that? Or other people. It's because I was reading the patents. I knew they were... I've talked to people who 25 years ago had government programs hiding microphones in TVs being sent out to the public. This has been going on for so long, and now they're building giant spy bases everywhere, and they're admitting that they're spying on patriots, people that don't want a Soviet model.
What is really happening is that you've got the governing class worldwide ganging up on the ordinary people worldwide. This is a completely new phenomenon. The idea of governments and keep an eye on what their people are doing is not new. What is new is that this is totalitarian in every sense. It's the entire governing class trying to make sure that people like you and me are shut down and excluded. I mean, the sheer anger when I spoke for 45 seconds and told those UN delegates 3 things they wouldn't have heard from anybody else. They didn't believe them because they'd never heard them before. They were furious, because just for once, one had got through the cordon of cotton wool that surrounds them, and they were made to listen whether they liked it or not. I didn't shout, I wasn't rude, I quietly said what I wanted to say and then stopped. It only took 45 seconds out of their session. And what do? They banned me from the conference. If I had said the opposite, they wouldn't even...
And what about these reports they may try to throw you out of the country?
Well, they can try, but they're not going to get very far with that, frankly. So all of that sort of thing, you know, the UN has a nice little deal with each country it goes to, that if the UN withdraws the credentials, and it's the kind of country where your visa is dependent upon having the credentials, then they think they can get away with saying, well, you know, if you're here beyond midnight, then you'll be arrested by the country that's the host country and you'll go to jail because you're an illegal immigrant. This is the kind of thing they do try on. But here I am, still in the Gulf. It didn't work. And I don't get worried by that sort of thing because I can play the bureaucratic game, frankly, better than they can. So that sort of thing just doesn't work. But certainly they are incandescent with fury, not because I spoke for 45 seconds and pretended to be the Republic of Burma. No, because that was perfectly harmless and it was only 45 seconds. What annoyed them was what I said and who I said it to.
And just to add something here before we go to calls...
These were national negotiating delegates. These were the people right at the top of the tree on this whole climate scam. And for the first time, they were told what nobody had told them before. No global warming for 16 years. It can't be said often enough.
All right, I want to go to some phone calls here, but getting back to the total spying, government tries to make everything it does secret and then exempt itself from what it does to us. But the answer to bring these people down is... expose them. Everyone get active. Everyone go confront people. Everybody go speak at city council. Everybody go testify at legislative hearings. Any citizen that wants to can get into these. These are on the record. Fire the truth at them at every angle. And as things get worse and worse under their system, everyone's going to know it's them. All we've got to do is call them out thousands of times, never stopping our irresistible force, and we will politically rip their arms out of their sockets. Folks, if you've ever been in a fight and you know you're going to win it, when you just click into that mode of, I'm going to win this, And folks, you've got to decide we're going to beat these people. You've got to just irresistibly reach out and never stop attacking them. In little ways, all of us together can move mountains. Lord Monckton, comment on that and ways to crush these authoritarian sycophant tyrants that are beyond 1984. And then I want to go to some phone calls.
One little trick you can do, and this is the first thing, always use an old mobile phone. They don't have all this fancy new technology built in because they were before the laws were passed. So there are various ways you can kind of get partly or even completely off the net where they can see what you're doing. Funny enough, I first came across this years ago when I wrote, quite by accident, a piece for a column I used to write for the Evening Standard, saying that I'd come across some people in the remotest Yorkshire Dales in the middle of the countryside who had been to see their parish priest to get some financial advice. And he'd said, do it this way and that way, and then you won't end up paying too much tax on it. And they said, oh, no, that doesn't make any difference to us. He said, oh, yes, it does. You know, you have to do it this way rather than that way. He said, no, it doesn't make any difference to us. You see, we haven't joined. And this particular household, none of its members had a birth certificate. They didn't have a telephone. They weren't on the electricity. They generated their own. Nobody knew they existed. They were running a very successful farm. They paid no tax at all because they were completely off the net. And when I wrote about this, because I was quite intrigued that such a thing was even possible this end of the 21st century, the Treasury, the UK Treasury, was absolutely furious with me for writing this because they said it would give other people ideas. So you do have, particularly in a country as wide as the United States with lots of open spaces, the ability simply to drop off the net and disappear. And some people are beginning, I mean, I spoke to an eminent dentist from Texas the other day who had made elaborate preparations to do exactly that. People are, I think, now rightly worried by the scale on which our ever dumber but ever more grasping and ambitious governing class is trying to take everything over and is destroying our economy as it does so. But of course, that we know that where that will ultimately lead, yes, they can impose dictatorship on us for a bit, but then, as it always does with dictatorships, the money will run out, they will collapse, freedom will come back, and because we've been through yet another round of dictatorship, we will learn still further.
And that's the historical cycle, and the globalists, as you know, admit that, and they say they're studying, show their authoritarianism will not go through that cycle. They call it the final revolution, if people want to look up that term. Now, expanding on this issue, I have found with government and other systems, it's all bluster. It's all the image that every spy is James Bond and every bureaucrat is invincible, and the public's all just scared and cowardly. I have found that when I want to sneak in Bohemian Grove, or I want to end, I mean, I just walked into a federal building, just said, open the gate and walked in the other day. And they freaked out once I got in there. But I'm going to show that next week. We haven't got the video edited yet. There's like 30 minutes of it. My point is, people just don't know the power that an individual has when you know you're in the right. We are incredibly powerful individuals, Lord Monckton.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, if you look at the sort of noises I've been trying to make on the climate over the last few years, I won't say I'm a lone voice. There are perhaps a dozen other gallant people who are spending a lot of time on this and getting themselves heard. But there aren't many of us who are really outspoken on this, and certainly very few who are willing to take the risk of doing what I did at the UN yesterday and calling them out in public and saying, look, come on, you've got the science wrong, you need to rethink this. The fact is that it does carry an enormous amount of weight. Of course, you know, I can imagine that all my friends are going to be in touch with the more serious-minded ones and say, don't you realize what a fool you've made yourself look? But all the other people are saying, well, look, nobody else is saying anything to stop this nonsense. And if this is the only way to get it through, it's not exactly as though I'd thrown a bomb or something. All I'd done was to take 45 seconds of their time. And they've been there for 2 weeks already, so I don't think they minded very much. What they minded was what I said, because they hadn't heard it before. And the important thing is, therefore, to make sure that you write to your congressmen and your senators, you telephone them, even if you end up speaking to a staffer. This does get through in the end.
That's right. Stay there, Lord Monckton. Call straight ahead for 2 short segments and a jam-packed third hour. Stay with us. our guest. I'm Alex Jones, your host. And we've got a gang of parasites that have taken over our society. That's the bottom line of what's happening. We're going to go ahead and go to some of your phone calls here right now. Let's talk to Julio in Illinois, listening on 1530 AM WCKG. That's in Chicago. Welcome to the airwaves, Julio. Go ahead.
Aloha, and Lord Monckton, thank you for all of your work over the years exposing this fraud and these mad scientists. That's what they are. And Lord Monckton, I have a question for you. It's quite clear that people know what they're doing, and as of late with Hurricane Sandy, or as they call it, Superstorm Sandy, they're trying to take advantage of this. One of the heads of NASA wrote in the London Telegraph that now we need carbon taxes because we're going to see more extreme weather. They have what they call climate engineering. These mad scientists want to manipulate the weather, in their own words, to help curb climate change. Did they discuss any of this in Doha, or were they discussing ways to expose extreme weather to carbon taxes?
Doing all of these things are on the agenda. They're still very keen on what they call carbon capture and storage, which has not been proven to work and would probably be quite dangerous, as well as wickedly expensive and wasteful of fossil fuels, because you use 40% more fossil fuel if you want to shove the carbon dioxide back into the ground after it's emitted when you burn it. So they've been discussing all of these things, and geoengineering hasn't really been featured that much at this particular conference because it's begun to seem just pretty kooky. And one of the things that they're quite worried about here is the kookiness of a number of the people that get attracted to these conferences. I mean, there was a person who was busily marketing a perpetual motion power station, which I had looked at last year by a nuclear physicist I knew in South Africa when I was at the Durban conference. And he asked them one question: is it a closed system? They said yes. He said in that case, it's a perpetual motion machine, it won't work. And all these kooks are now turning up here saying we can geoengineer, we can do this, we can do that, just give us a few trillion and we'll do it for you. And even the delegates here, who are pretty scientifically illiterate, it has to be said, are beginning to realize that some of these scientists are just looking to make themselves rich without delivering anything in return. They are the old-fashioned, as the economists call them, rent seekers. So no, I think geoengineering is gradually disappearing off the radar. We've got to keep an eye because they'll keep trying. But I don't think it's the major danger. I think the major danger is of taxation and regulation and interference with how much electricity you can use and when you can use it. And they're very cleverly marketing this by calling them smart metering, the smart grid. It's something you hear Al Gore talking about, and you know if he's talking about it, it's going to be bad.
And it's a surveillance grid where it watches everything in your house. All the new appliances are coming out to interface with it. These people are, it's like 10 times 1984 with a bunch of weird, simpering ninnies. But I guess they're not like Hitler where they're in a uniform or Napoleon, so people aren't threatened by it. They just simper around all day.
This is tyranny without jackboots. It's very, very clever, the presentation of this. It's all for your own good. We're saving the planet. It's good for the environment. The kids are joining in. You know, it's all touchy-feely. It's very emotional. But in fact, it's very dangerous because they are trying to go for ever more control over every aspect of our lives.
Do you understand how dark it is? How far down the line we are? How late it is?
Chet in New York, listening on 1590 AM WASB. Welcome, Chet. You're on the air.
Hello, Mr. Jones and Lord Monckton. First, Merry Christmas to both of you and your families. I was just wondering, Lord Monckton, if you thought the new reverse technology they're going to use is going to be like the total way to get that green tax implemented, because, you know, everyone has to use like a cell phone or their computer, even their television, their appliances. You know, is that something that is behind the scenes that, you know, that you've investigated? That'd be my question.
Sure. Let me try to get a question out of that. You're saying...
Yeah, I've got the question.
Go ahead.
I've got the question. Let me say it. The question is, can they use all these new technologies that we now spend so much our time talking to each other with in order to control us, monitor us, learn about us, tell us instructions, turn off our electricity? Yes, they can, and they will if they think they can get away with it. But the great thing is that as people become more aware of this, there are things that can be done about it. You can retrofit your devices with additional devices that filter out their ability to watch you, listen to you, control you, turn off your electricity, etc. And we can invent and install these devices faster than they can pass laws saying we're not allowed to. And in the end, we will simply get the better of them by out-technologizing them. The great thing is what they're trying to do is actually wildly ambitious. And with very, very simple precautions, you can prevent them doing it. For instance, the two guys who invented pretty good privacy, which is a form of encoding and encrypting your emails, they used a thing called a trapdoor cipher, which was a very nice advanced concept in mathematics, which prevented the authorities from being able to decode the emails of people who use this particular system. And that's the first of many such devices and possibilities that are now beginning to come onto the market. It's going to be a huge growth industry when people realize just how unfree they could be made if they were to allow these devices, which now, as Alex is saying, have these built-in abilities to communicate with the center.
Let's jam in one more, Lord Monckton. Frank in Louisiana, you're on the air listening on shortwave.
Yes, you know, we know that these globalists are of a diabolical mindset and they're godless misanthropes. And I remember in the 90s, Catherine Bertini of the UN World Food Group came out and said that food is a weapon. We use it to control people. For this, we do not apologize. What does Lord Monckton think about this, and has he seen any of that coming up?
Well, indeed, this is exactly what has been going on, and even from within the UN, there are now concerns about this kind of flagrant interference by the UN in, of course, chiefly the lives of poorer people in the poorer countries. And the UN's Right to Food rapporteur, Herr Jean Ziegler, said in 2007 that the biofuel scam was a crime against humanity. He said when people are, when millions are starving, the diversion of food to biofuels is a crime against humanity. They themselves are beginning to realize that this is wrong. And that is why I went into that conference and told them...
Well said, Lord Monckton. Great job. Great job there fighting for us. Scienceandpublicpolicy.org. That's the correct site, right?
That's the one.
All right, fantastic. I'm going from memory. I visit it all the time. God bless you. We appreciate you, sir. Alex Jones here with some very important breaking news. The latest edition of Infowars magazine, December 2012, is out. And no, we don't really cover people that think that the world is going to end on December 21st. We are predicting the world will not end. But we are predicting that the end of our free republic may take place if people don't wake up and get aggressive and angry and speak out against what's happening. This man wants your guns. That is the cover of the 60-page glossy magazine, jam-packed with information and the truth. And you know what they say, the truth will set you free. You can buy the magazine at cost in bulk in groups of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, right up to 100 to give everyone you know. And believe me, people will open this up. It is full of unbelievably powerful graphics, cartoons. We've got artist profiles on patriots out there that are exposing the globalists. And it's got several articles breaking down the facts that Obama and his globalist controllers want to disarm the American people and are going to try to ban all semi-autos. The facts are in this magazine, and this is the most important of the 4 issues we have ever put out. And when you do sign up for the subscription, you don't just get 12 in the mail. When supplies last of the previous issues, we will put back issues like the November issue, Zombies, Are You a Zombie? Breaking down how television has put the general public into a trance-like state. You will get that when you sign up for the next 12 issues in December of 2012. Now, you're out there watching saying, Alex, we know all about the New World Order, and yes, the magazine's a great thing, but why should we support it? Well, you're also supporting free speech and print 2.0. With the internet kill switches coming in and all the rest of this, it's important to have physical copies that are out there, just like the founders did in the 10 years leading up to the Revolutionary War in 1776. They put out their little primitive broadsheets printed on both sides, pointing out the crimes of the crown, and that helped organize and awake the public to finally win the physical victory when war and conflict unfortunately came. My goal is to expose the globalist and to win the info war so it doesn't become a physical war. We've seen Hillary Clinton saying that they're winning the info war. Top globalist Zbigniew Brzezinski says that nationalism is growing and that people are waking up against outside forces because of populism and alternative media. This particular issue of the magazine is the one to give friends and family. It's the one to put under the tree or in the stocking. It's the one to leave at church. It's the one to leave at the dentist office. This is the one, the December issue of Infowars magazine with Ron Paul, the attack on the Second Amendment, the police state, the GMO takeover. It's all there and all available at InfoWarsStore.com or by calling 888-253-3139. Get your subscription or buy the magazines in bulk today. I'm Alex Jones signing off for Infowars.com. Until next time, remember, if you're watching this, if you're receiving this transmission, you are the resistance.